when we're thinking about legitimate facts, figures, not just rhetoric, action-based solutions, conservatism is what saved me.
Your message is very, very timely, especially in this election year. President Trump is now polling with percentages of 20% and above in the African-American community. Some people say he might get 30 or 40% of the African-American vote. If he does, game over, he wins the election.
Approval ratings at 30% and continue to go up, and we know why.
Why?
It's because this is a president that has provided solutions to the ills in which a lot of policies. There you go. There you go.
Yeah. So let's be specific.
They like the word solutions.
And that's an important point, solutions. Yeah. Let's be specific. Yeah. What has he done for Black America that other politicians promised but never delivered?
Well, we can talk about the lowest unemployment rate among African Americans on record. We can talk about the First Step Act, which is thousands of people. I love y'all!
And that was very powerful. It was bipartisan. It was an important reform in the criminal justice system. And it wasn't necessarily race-specific, but truly, I think all of us have to admit, and I was a governor long enough to look at sentencing and realize people in the African-American community were getting sentenced disproportionately to other people in the culture. I mean, it was just a reality.
Well, let's be very clear about where these policies came from. Joe Biden was the architect of the '94 crime bill. We're talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in jail. And as you've previously mentioned, a lot for infractions like a dime bag of marijuana. There's been a lot of individuals who had the draconian policies of the '94 crime bill or the '86 crack laws, again, pushed by Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, which have harmed the Black community. So when we think about what policy solutions in which President Trump has offered, the First Step Act is a critical one because we're talking about thousands of people released from jail, 90% of them being African American. We're talking about permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities. There's been a lot of policies that no politician, whether they be a Democrat or Republican, in my lifetime that have been passed and implemented by this president and has benefited the African-American community. And that's why I talk about that and taken for granted.
Gianno, I want to be very clear. The president's First Step Act was not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Of course not.
This was for nonviolent offenders, often first-time offenders, who were going to prison for long sentences. A great example.
Yes.
Basically would have been in prison for life.
Yeah.
But really, the punishment did not fit the crime.
Correct.
Let's talk about, you grew up in the south side of Chicago. Wasn't the easiest place probably to grow up in. It's, I'm sure, a lot harder now to live there than it ever has been. President Trump, 4 years ago, made a statement, and a lot of people thought it was a crass statement, but it turned out to be pretty
What do you
blunt.
have to lose?
That's what he said.
That's right.
Vote for me. What do you have to lose? You've been voting for these other guys for all this time. Did that take root with a lot of people in the community?
I'll flip that on his head and say, what do you have to gain? And I just mentioned what we've had to gain. And this isn't something that's just been for African Americans. Clearly, has benefited those in manufacturing, those in the Appalachian region who really needed the help as well. The opioid crisis, which is another issue, because I grew up on the south side of Chicago, extremely poor, lights, gas, and water off at the same time. I'm addicted to crack cocaine. So that's an issue that's very, very close to my heart. And I'm thankful that this isn't a president who simply talks about the issues or says how bad it is or use nice rhetoric like we've seen with Joe Biden and, well, maybe I shouldn't say Bloomberg because it's not nice rhetoric, right? so we hear what they really think. But this is someone who's providing solutions. And I think that moves the conversation forward. And I think it uplifts everyone. And I think that's the conversation we should be having as a country.
The power of your story is that if you were just a raw statistic, you should still be living in the south side of Chicago, probably on drugs and living in poverty. How come you got out and other people haven't?
My faith in God. And let me be very clear about that. Thank you. Be very clear. I'm so thankful. And you know what? I think and I talk about it in my book, Taken for Granted, there's an overlooked part of faith, an active faith. One in which I think people need to realize, especially young folks, because I know y'all got it. I've been here in Nashville for all of a day, and people are praying for me in their Uber. So, and that's a serious story. Like, that literally happened today.
No kidding.
So y'all got it. But there's so many young folks in this country who don't understand that the power of God, the power of his favor, unmerited favor you don't deserve. So it doesn't matter about the decisions you might have made that might have been negative. He still have open arms to bring you right in and treat you like it never happened before. So with that being the case, me growing up in the church and having a pastor by the name of Bill Winston, if you know who he is, who taught, hey, I love it, who said you're not a victim, you're not your past, no matter if you were born across the tracks or on the tracks, you will be successful, you will be victorious, and that's the kind of God that I serve.
You know, when you talk about that in your book, the message is don't go around whining about the way things are.
Yeah.
And you were so blessed to have a pastor who, rather than say, oh, it's not your fault.
Right.
It's your parents' fault. It's your mother's fault. It's the neighborhood's fault. It's the government's fault.
Correct.
You had an influence in your life, in this case, a pastor, who did not allow you to wallow around in self-pity, but told you you had a shot. This was America. When you talk about that in Taken for Granted, this, to me, incredible book, and I think
you so much.
It's so very powerful to say, it's not about Democrats and Republicans or even ideology. It's whether or not you have the capacity to believe you are an individual, you are not just a member of a group, and you're not waiting on your group to get better for you to get better.
Right. I believe we all, each individual in this room, all these hundreds of people, we have in us this hidden ability. We just happen to call it potential. It's just going to take some work to pull it out, and every day there's an effort that you use to make yourself a better person. And with God's guidance, because I think that's key, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not to your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path.
Yeah.
With that guidance, you shall move forward. So we're gonna cancel fear, no more fear. 2 Timothy 1:7.
There is a second part of the subtitle of the book, that liberalism failed a lot of Americans. How did liberalism fail people, and more specifically in the African-American community?
So if we look at this, look back to the 60s, the single mother rate was about 25%. Now is it about 80%?
Whoa.
Yeah.
80%?
80%. Clear facts, you can go Google it, research it. When you think about a lot of the abortion statistic, millions of babies aborted. So we don't have the kind of population in which we could have and really be able to flex that power.
And can we mention that more African-American babies are aborted?
Than any other.
Disproportionately, not just in number, but proportionately. Why isn't there an outcry from more of the African-American leaders about their community being aborted at a much higher rate than any other population?
Well, I mean, why would the Democrats want to say anything when Planned Parenthood is giving them so much money and resources for their campaigns? Like, that's a legitimate consideration.
Yeah.
You think about Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood, and what her original goal was, and that was the elimination of black children. So when we're thinking about legitimate facts, figures, not just rhetoric, action-based solutions, conservatism is what saved me. I mean, I lost a lot of friends. I talked about recently how I was at a Hollywood party and Tiffany Haddish, I went up to shake her hand and she says to me, "I know who you are. You're that Republican from Fox News." And she refused to shake my hand.
Wow.
And you know, I'm a single guy. Follow me on Instagram at Gianno Caldwell. Slide in the DMs, we here. But you can lose friends, but at the end of the day though, are you doing it for a greater purpose? And that's why I'm doing this. And I'm thankful to be an individual who worked in politics since I was 14, found conservatism, and I found a better life.